My name is Bill Bequette. I was born in October 29th, 1936, and I was born in Lowell, Arkansas.
And this interview is for the Farmington Oral History Project, and we want to be sure that we have your permission to use the interview.
You have my permission to interview me.
Thank you, Bill. Tell me about your parents.
Well, my parents moved here from Lowell, Arkansas in 1943, and their name was Hal and Lena Bell Bequette, and my mother was a school teacher.
Tell me about your brothers and sisters.
I had one brother, and he was 7 years younger than I was, and he was born just about the time that we moved to Farmington.
And what was your family's business when you were growing up?
Well, my mother was a school teacher and my dad was a farmer. And he wouldn't help, he would work for someone else occasionally, but his agreement was they had to work for him the same amount of time. In other words, he traded work with people.
What was your part in the family business?
Well, I got up early and we had some milk cows. We milked by hand. And I would get up early in the morning and milk cows and then milk at night and help my dad do that.
What other jobs did you work besides helping out on the farm?
Well, as I got a little older, my jobs were, I worked for a man cleaning seed, and I worked for people picking strawberries and cutting grapes, and just anything to make a dollar, and that's what I did.
Did you ever work for the Starks or the Hobo Hickman?
I never did work for Stark's nursery, but I knew Hobo Hickman well, and Hobo was the one that I was going to go to California with my '49 Ford car, and I stopped by and asked him about, take a look at it and tell me what's wrong, and he listened to it and looked at it and drove it, and then he told me that, he said, I think it'll be okay, just don't go backwards.
How'd that trip turn out?
It turned out great. Bill Andrews and I went, we spent about 4 months in California, and we lived in his aunt and uncle's garage, Ruby and Roy Drake. And he worked for a orange packing company, and I worked for a Quickset Lock Company in Anaheim, California.
When you were growing up as a kid on the farm, what were some of the things you would do at home besides milk cows? What were some of your routines?
Well, one thing I did, I liked for the place to look good, so I would cut the fence row out with an old weed hook and down the roadway, and I did that because I just wanted it to look good. My folks never told me I needed to. I just wanted it to look nice. So.
Tell me more about the farm. What did y'all have besides milk cows?
We had horses. My granddad had horses here on the farm, and obviously we lived next door to my granddad, and he had horses and an old wagon that he bought new, and he'd pulled it from the other side of Rogers. And he had mules hooked to it on the back, and besides that, and he drove it over here, and then my aunt and my mother and my grandmother rode a train from Avoca, Arkansas.
Tell me about your earliest memories of Farmington.
Well, when we first moved here in 1943, we didn't have electricity for a while, and we had to use an old coal oil lamp for a while until we got electric. The house was wired for electricity, but they didn't have any lines there to it at that point, and so that was a. It didn't take. We probably lived there 6 months or a year without electricity.
Tell me about some of the businesses and places y'all would trade and go to.
Well, the one that I really remember was McNeil Grocery, and I used to buy things there. And when I was younger, I had a credit there. She kept it on a little book, and I had credit. And the summer that I moved, I forgot to pay her, and I was living in California, so I told my dad to stop by and pay her what I owed her. And then the White's Grocery was just down the street. Rika and J.B. White had a grocery store there. J.B. was one of the first mayors of Farmington. And then DeLance Phillips had a grocery store, and DeLance didn't like if you just bring money, big money up there and to buy a bottle of pop. And we found that out, and I would go in and get a bottle of pop and take a cap off of it, and then start drinking it, and then hand him a $20 bill. And he'd get so mad, but he always took it. And so that was some of the first memories that I remember of Farmington stores.
Why didn't he want $20 bills?
I have no idea why he didn't want the money. Why he didn't want big money. I guess he just didn't want to go make change for it. And then another thing I remember is the old post office, and it was kind of a meeting place. It was right across the road from McNeil's Grocery, and it was a meeting place for all of us, and we'd stop there in our cars when we went at night or day. Whenever we came in, we'd all try to get together there, and because I can remember over at McNeil's, they had a big sign there and up in the air, and Stanley Wolf he finally ended up making his living by being in high places, but he'd be up there on that sign. He'd climb the sign and be up on it and talk to us from there. And that was an eventful time, and the postmaster then was Russell Broyles, and for many years. And
tell me more about Russell and Clara Broyles.
They were good people, and they did a lot of nice things for the community. My first memory of Russell that I really remember is I used to stop by there and get her mail, and I came in the post office one day, and I told him about a little 3 acres that I could buy over in Gibson Hill for $100, and he just listened to me. And the next day I came in there, he handed me $100, and he said, "Go buy that, we'll be partners." So I bought it, and it was just really an old hollow there. And then later on, I bought another little place down on the creek, and he bought it from me, and I took that land trade-in on it, so I owned the whole thing. And Russell and Clara they had the old cemetery, where the old Kennybrook Cemetery, and they owned the land. Actually, the Broyles family did. And Russell gave us a deed to the Farmington Cemetery, a deed to that, and if we'd take it as part of the Farmington Cemetery, and he also gave us they gave us $25,000 to go with, to take it, in other words. So and that went in our cemetery fund.
What about his house?
His house was right across from the old Methodist church. That's where he went to church, and the house was new, and it was built in I'd say in about '49, and it was a very nice house. And he had a little farm there behind there, and Alvin Andrews had the farm rented, and he had hay in there. And Alvin was a trader of anything, and Bob Garner wanted to buy the hay in there out of that barn, and he looked at it from a road, and some siding was off the barn, and there's all hay was stacked there, and he thought he could count it, and he asked Alvin about how many bales were there, and Alvin told him, and Bob bought it. And then when Bob got ready to get it, most of the strings had been chewed up by rats, and the hay was there, but it wasn't in bales anymore. So Bob always laughed about that and said that's what Alvin did. Alvin didn't guarantee him anything on it. So,
tell me about going to school in Farmington. What that was like.
Well, and going to school in Farmington was in ways I enjoyed it, in ways I didn't. I didn't really like school that well, but it was nice, and we had some good teachers. In fact, the case, Hazel Penn was one of the teachers that I liked best, but she used to paddle on me quite often, and at her memorial, they asked people to stand, and I stood and stand, and Preston Beeks asked, well, how many other people here? And there's a whole bunch of people stood up and said she paddled us too, but she was a good teacher.
Who are some of the other teachers or folks you remember from the school?
Well, I thought a lot of Fred Kerr. Fred was the superintendent at that point, and Fred also used to bail on me once, and it was odd because I was helping him with his chores. Pop Williams and I were helping with his chores, and in the afternoon, and he paddled me, and probably the same day I went out to did his chores, and he never mentioned it. Neither one of us mentioned that. And another one that I thought a lot of was Mac Hamblin. Mac was our agriculture teacher, and he also taught mathematics. And he was an old paratrooper, and he operated the way that we understood. And we'd line the halls up and jab people, and Mac came through one day with his arms just going sideways like that and hit us all. Didn't say a word, just went up and looked back and grinned, but we got the message. We never did any more of that.
Who are some of your classmates and friends?
My friends, well, I had a whole lot of them, and the ones that I really remember well are Donald Williams and Pop Williams, and they weren't any kin, but we all three ran around together a lot, and then the Williams boys lived just down the field from our place, and they had 7 boys and 1 girl, and there was about 4 boys at home whenever I was young, and I just go across the field to their place, and one time they gave me a haircut, which didn't look too good. And their dad was O.L. Williams, and O.L., if we all got in a fight, everybody got whipping. And one day I saw him coming to get us, and I made a run for home. And the next day I came down, and he said, "You need to get yours today." So, but he didn't. And so.
You've mentioned some, but who are some of the people in the community of Farmington you remember growing up?
I remember Jake Wells was our neighbor, one of our neighbors across the road, and I remembered he and his wife Amy, and she worked for Buddy Elkins at the post office when he was postmaster for a while. And my dad bought 10 acres, or my dad bought 20 acres, and that he sold 10 of it to Jake Wells. but he gave $1,000 for the 20 acres, and he got, just a few days later, he got $1,000 for the 10 acres. So he cleared 10 acres of land.
Tell me about, did your family attend church, and if so, where did y'all go?
Well, we attended the Methodist church in Farmington, and I went there, went pretty regular until I met my wife, and she was going to the Church of Christ. So gradually, I started attending the Church of Christ in Farmington, which we've attended since we got married in that church, and we've attended there all the time we've been married, which is 61 years. And other than 4 years that we lived away from here in other places. So
when you were a kid growing up in Farmington, what would you and your friends do for fun?
Well, we liked to ride bicycles, and we rode bicycles all over the country, and we did that. And the Williams boys had a donkey, and we rode the old donkey, and it was a mean donkey. And then we saw these Western movies, and we saw a stagecoach going off a hill and out of control, and so we took the shafts out of the buggy they had, and then we'd put it on the hill, and we'd play our own game of doing what the movies did. So
did you use wagons or buggies much when you were a kid?
Yeah, we used the wagon that we still have it on a farm, the wagon that my granddad pulled over here from Avoca, and we still had it, and my granddad would take it over to Prairie Grove to the mill, and he would take a load of corn over, and then I'd go with him, and that was about an all-day trip because the mill was over in south of Prairie, just in Prairie Grove, south part of town, and the way I'd do it, I'd ride the wagon seat with him, spring seat it's called, and I'd ride it with him, and then I would get out and run in a while, and then I'd ride the coupling pole, which is the smoothest place in the back because it had some spring to it. So I'd do that, and sometimes I'd go with him, and I'd get sick because he'd buy candy, and I'd eat too much candy. So.
When you were a kid, what would your parents and other adults do for fun?
Well, usually they'd about once a week while they'd visit somebody in the community, and they'd usually have popcorn, and then they'd sometimes they played cards, and that is pretty simple life. And then my granddad liked to go to movies, and so the old movie at Prairie Grove, they would send you out ahead of time the months what movies there, and we'd circle the ones we wanted to see. And he couldn't drive or didn't drive, and my Aunt Marie would take us to the movies that he and I wanted to go to. He liked the Western movies, so.
Let's talk about the city, the growth of the city. I know you were involved at some point with the Planning Commission. How did you get involved, and then what changes did you see when you were involved in that?
Well, whenever I like to start when I talk about the city of Farmington back when I first remembered it, and there was probably less than 100 people in Farmington at that point. And then as we went along, I felt like that we saw Farmington starting to grow, and so I felt we needed a planning commission. And I don't remember who the mayor was at that point, but they asked me about it, and I was glad to serve on that. And I think that Janie Steele was probably on that, and Margie Hickman. I know Margie was a recorder that she worked for the city then at that point. I think her name was Margie Smith, actually. And
what were some of the issues that you all looked at back then? Some of the decisions you made thinking about the long-term growth?
Well, we did. We knew and they have always, as long as I can remember, they had a building inspections, but they were simple. They were simple and not too good at that point. So we thought they needed better building inspections, and we definitely thought they needed to have some zoning set up in Farmington. And one of the things that we did was it was kind of controversy for some people, but we had certain areas that we wouldn't allow trailer houses in any area unless it was a trailer park, and that was kind of controversial, but it was a good move, I think.
About when did y'all make that decision, if you remember?
That was probably in the I'd say that was in the mid to late 60s. Because the reason I was familiar with part of it, I was building houses in Fayetteville, and I knew how they operated, and I was building houses there in the 60s and 70s, and I knew how they did, and I was trying to get us kind of like that, and for the long-term good of the city.
Talk about the growth of the city, how you went from just a few hundred to now several thousand.
Well, the growth was, I think, one of the things that helped the growth was when the old Griff Wilson farm was bought by three guys that John Lossing, Gary Stearman, and Donald Williams bought the old Griff Wilson estate and land, and they started putting in. The biggest thing I noticed was they put the South Winds Drive down through the middle, which tied it on over 170 highway, and it wasn't done 100%. They've had to do some work on it after that, but that was a starter. And then look at all the commercial that have grown as a result of that, and still still going. A lot of that's full now, but then it's going even further then.
What about the city services? I know they've grown over the years, especially like the fire department was very simple, and now it's in new facilities and
well, the police department and the fire department have all grown, and they grow accordingly to the people, and we're in that. That's where the growth of the stores and businesses are paying a certain amount per month, and all as they grow, then the fire department and police department can grow. And the police department, the fire department is a great fire department, and I'm one of their best clients because I have started 2 fires personally, and had them put out, and then the police department, I've gotten some tickets, and the police department has gotten, I think, more professional than they were. At one point, they were a speed trap, and they don't do that anymore. They seem to take care of their business, but not a speed trap.
One of the big traditions in Farmington has always been, or for in recent decades, has been the fireman's pancake breakfast. Have you ever attended that, and what do you know about that?
I guess I've attended that fireman's breakfast. My wife and I think, have attended every one of them that they have, and that gives you an opportunity to see a lot of people, and because the community really comes out for that, and then we usually make a good donation in honor of all the problems I've caused them. So,
what's the earliest one you remember, and then kind of talk about the changes, how it's grown of the breakfasts?
You know, I don't remember dates on the breakfasts. I'm guessing it's probably 10 years, but I don't know. Mark Cunningham would know, but I don't know that.
What are some other things you can remember over the years about the city and the changes?
Well, I remember a lot about the cemetery, and because whenever I was young, my granddad Brown, one of the things that he did was hand dig a lot of graves there, and they kept them straight. It was unbelievable how good they did, job they did. So I would run around up there, and I've been on the board now probably for about 25 years, that cemetery, and that started with that. And then when they asked me to go on the board, they said they needed some younger people. Well, I'm saying the same thing now and getting younger people to help. I'm training a couple now to work on the board.
One of the photos we have of you is I think in front of the old post office. I think you may have mentioned this.
Yeah, I had
talk about your group of friends in that.
Well, I had a 30.
What y'all were doing.
I had a '39 Chevrolet Coupe there, and in there with me was Pop Williams, and then standing around was Donald Williams and Herbert Dorman, and one of the Clayton boys, and that picture was taken by my wife and my girlfriend then, and it. But and that was what I was referring to earlier whenever I said we all met down there. So.
What are some other stories you can remember about Farmington?
Well, on the cemetery, I think that we've had good leadership. One of the first ones that was Lucy Phillips, and they had the grocery store before her son DeLance took it over, and Francis Williams, and we had and Hazel and Ernie Penn. In most of these cases, the women names there, we have the streets named after Lois Smith, and we have streets in the cemetery named after them, and then we have the pavilion named after Barbara Mitchell. And Barbara was the one that helped get the cemetery and the bylaws and so forth done on the cemetery.
How long has that cemetery been in use? Tell me the earliest history you know.
I believe that was started in. I had it written down as it was in the Farmington Cemetery was started in 1866, and the Kennebrew Cemetery was 1843. And then there's another cemetery that's over on Phillips Places, just south of Highway 62, and it's oldest. It was a Pettigrew Allen Cemetery, and it was in 1839. So it was the oldest.
Do you know of the history about the town and the name of the town, how that began and it changed over time?
You know, the name of the town, I had read about that, but I don't have that. I don't have it in my memory.
What are some other stories you can think of maybe that I haven't thought to ask about?
Well, one of the odd things we did, we were swimming over an Illinois River, and we went over there. And I say swimming. We jumped in because it was about March and there was snow on the ground, but water was where we could get in. So we jumped in there, and we left our clothes in a pickup truck that belonged to Donald Williams. And so as we got out, there were three of us, Donald, and I referred to Pop and me, which we were running around together quite a bit. So as we got out, one of us said to the other one, let's get our clothes, let's jump in the truck and lock the door so Pop can't get in. And so we did, and he was naked driving, and we drove him all around the community of Bethel Grove and for a while, and it was cold. And finally we stopped and let him get up in the front with us and get his clothes on. So, and I'm sure that he got even with us somewhere down the line. So.
Any more stories of fun or mischief you can remember?
Well, Pop Williams was up when they were building a new gymnasium, and he and I were up there, and we were walking the girders while they were on the ground, the metal girders on the ground, and then they put them up in the air, and they were way up in the air, and he was up there walking them. And I said, well, how do you do that? And he said, well, you walked them on the ground. You ought to be able to walk them in the air. But that was his story.
If somebody came to you and they said, Bill, tell me about your hometown of Farmington. What's your town like? What would you tell them?
I would say that right now it's a beautiful town. And the people in charge have kept it looking nice. In other words, they haven't allowed a lot of junk to accumulate. There is places that it accumulates from time to time, but they're usually taken care of then as they go along. And a part of it is, I think people have a lot of pride in keeping things looking nice. So I would refer to it as a pretty town.
If someone asked you to complete this sentence, my favorite thing about Farmington is, what would you say? How would you say complete that sentence?
Well, I'd say the people. You know, the people that I've known and the people that I know now, which is increasing the ones I don't know because there's so many new ones moving in. But I'd say the people. And for example, I went up to the senior citizens the other day, and they had a band going, and a country western band, which they do on Tuesday, they tell me. And so I sat there and listened to it for a while, and just people, I think, is the thing.